Hello, welcome to the History of Bangalore. I am Ramjee Chandran, and I welcome you back to the show. This is Season 1, Episode 29, and the sun sets on yet another Deccan Empire, the Gangas. It was a time when things were changing rapidly in the Deccan. The Western Chalukyas came seemingly out of nowhere, unseating the Rashtrakutas, taking their kingdom. And then the Cholas came out of a 600-year retirement and eradicated the Pallavas. And just like that, the Rashtrakutas and the Pallavas, once considered the mightiest empires of the south, were gone. And soon after, the sun began to set on the Ganga Empire. Now, in their long reign of centuries, the Gangas had dealt with a lot. They had built an empire seemingly out of nothing, an empire that was indomitable. They were great at politics, and in the larger picture, they had refused to bend to anyone. From the 6th century onwards, they were allies and in-laws of the Vatapi Chalukyas, always at the ready to take up arms for their friends. They had battled the Pallavas on several occasions on behalf of the Vatapi Chalukyas and had defended their territory valiantly wherever it counted. After they fell and the Rashtrakutas took over, for almost 2 centuries, they resisted becoming vassals of the Rashtrakutas, and because of that, they suffered greatly. Their king Shivamara II was imprisoned twice by them. They lost key generals in battles. They lost princes of the realm in battles. But for all that, the Gangas were, and I use this phrase with some irony, never say die. Finally, they were co-opted peacefully by Amogavarsha Nrupatunga, the Rashtrakuta, who gave his daughter in marriage to Butuga, then a Ganga prince. Following that, the Gangas became allies of the Rashtrakutas, right up to the point of rising to defend the last emperor, Indra IV, against the rise of the Western Chalukyas. And not long after that, the Ganga Empire fell. The story of the Gangas is compelling, and it is one of those stories that I have tried to tell in the detail that it deserves, because the history of the Gangas is the early history of Bangalore. And as I said a little earlier, I did tell the story of the Gangas so far in several episodes. You might want to catch the series on the birth and growth of that kingdom in the episodes titled The Ganga Dynasty, Part 1 through Part 6. And then, following my 10-part series on the Chalukyas, I went through the complicated relationship that the Gangas had with the Rashtrakutas in 5 episodes, the ones with the obvious titles, and now I resume my series on the Gangas from after the death of Amogavarsha the Rashtrakuta to the end of the Gangas. So this is part 7 of the last series of the Gangas. In the previous episode, I walked you through all the events of the 9th century that led to the end of the Pallavas and the Rashtrakutas, and in this episode, I will walk you through what happened to the Ganga Dynasty in that same period of time. But first, I must pause to express my thanks to the Prestige Group for their sponsorship, which makes this podcast possible. Building cities one landmark at a time, they transform dreams into reality. You can be a part of the future. Simply add prestige to your life. I remarked earlier that the history of the Gangas was the history of Bangalore. So let's take a look at what the Bangalore region was like back then. And to do that, we will need to talk about the main players in the area, the Gangas and the Nolambas. Now, both of them were feudatory kingdoms, not the principal kingdoms, and their existence was tied into the empire that ruled the overall area. Now, the territory under the control of such an overlord emperor depended on who his feudatories and vassals were, all of whom would contribute to the coffers of the overlord and then benefit from joining a larger coalition of kingdoms. But when overlords became weak or distracted, feudatories always became more assertive, more powerful, more in control of their territories, and this led to several power plays in the region. But how serious were these power plays and what did they look like? Well, that depended on how ambitious the feudatory was and what they may have been after. The attacks could range from insignificant things like border skirmishes and cattle raids to the plunder of wealth and women, on to outright conquest of kingdoms. Now, history, quite rightly, doesn't pay much attention to these smaller skirmishes, except that in this region there are several hero stones, or Veeragallus, that record that a local chieftain or a brave individual had lost his life in a fight. But much of the time you can tell a minor incursion from a battle by how these inscriptions are worded and by how much importance is paid to the one who died and is being commemorated on that stone. And there are other clues. For example, the depiction of a horse on a carving must mean that that battle was important, simply because horses were expensive to buy and maintain. And this brings me to a very interesting aside: horses. It astonished me how much the Deccan Empire spent on horses, so I thought I would take a little time to share that information with you. So let's take a look at how expensive these horses were. To begin with, they had to be imported from Persia. The Italian traveler Marco Polo wrote that the Pandyas, for example, bought horses from the Persians at 500 saggi of gold each. A saggi, an old Italian unit of weight used in the medieval time, was roughly 2.5 grams. So if a horse was sold for 500 saggi, that's 1.25 kilos of gold per horse. Now, I know it's a bit silly to see how much that is worth today, but it's tempting. So at 7,500 rupees a gram at October 2024 prices, that's 95 lakh rupees, or just under 10 million rupees a horse. Possibly 10 times more than what a horse would cost today, a good one. According to Marco Polo, each of the 4 Pandya brothers imported 2,000 horses a year, and then so did every other kingdom and feudatory in the Deccan in varying numbers. Do the math, but not on a small calculator. Also, sadly, these horses died very quickly for lack of maintenance. The horse merchants, or the Kudre Chettis, would not allow farriers, or horse breeding people, to come into the country, and they kept horse maintenance knowledge from the kings. And for their greed, these horses would become slow and stupid and die early, requiring the kingdoms to buy thousands of more horses every year. And in case you're pondering the obvious question, why didn't they simply breed the horses here? Well, they tried, but Marco Polo said that for whatever reasons, the results were terrible. He wrote of horse breeding in the Deccan, and I quote, "As hath often been proved by trial, even when a blood mare is covered by a blood horse, the offspring is a wretched wry-legged weed, not fit to ride." Well, the point in our case is that only elite cavalry men of a royal standing army would ride horses, so their presence on an inscription meant that the battle was politically important. One example closer to home is the so-called Kitaya stone, unearthed in Hebal in 2018, saved by local groups from being buried under roadworks. The Kitaya stone records one incident in the 8th century when Sri Purusha was on the Ganga throne. It was a troubled period when the Rashtrakutas were carrying out several attacks on prime Ganga properties. And one of those places was Hebal, a valuable trade junction in the Gangavadi, and their mission was to burn it to the ground. The stone depicts a man with a raised sword, and you can see another man astride a horse. The stone commemorates the man with the sword, a local hero who died fighting the Rashtrakutas. The other figure, the one on the horse, could only have been a cavalryman for the attacking Rashtrakutas. That gives you an indication of how important this was. That inscription stone, incidentally, is visible today in Hebal, preserved under a stone canopy built in the style and method of the 6th century Ganga period architecture. You can find it on Google Maps. It's worth the visit. Now, galloping back to our story, the new overlords of the Deccan, the Kalyani or Kalyana Chalukyas, did not exercise control over the same areas exactly as the Rashtrakutas did. But the boundaries of their sphere of control had shifted a little, And this brings me to the Nolambas. Now, you have heard me bring up their name off and on while talking about the various conflicts in the region in previous episodes. A Kannada-speaking people, the Nolambas claimed their descent was from the Pallavas of Kanchipuram, and indeed, they are often referred to as the Nolamba Pallavas. There's a puzzling paucity of books written about them in terms of their politics, but quite a bit about their architecture. And their architecture, even to my untrained eyes, is remarkable. The Nolambas ruled over the areas of Tumkur and Chitradurga in Karnataka, Anantapur, now in Andhra, Dharmapuri and Salem, now in Tamil Nadu, these being districts, and they also shared a common border right here in the Bangalore district with the Gangas, towards the north and the east of the city. The Gangas ruled over a large swath radiating out of Talakadu and Kolar and several areas of South Bangalore, including Begur and western areas such as Hebbal. Now, all of these areas were central to the East Coast to West Coast trade, and we will go over that in some more detail a little later. The Nolambas started as a small clutch of villages and then became a large clutch of villages, and they were now referred to as the Nolambabadi 32,000. The Nolambas took on a larger than usual role towards the end of the 9th century, and they were a part of the sweeping changes that led to the collapse of so many kingdoms so close together. And with this setup in place, let's go into a commercial break and into all the interesting stuff that happened in the Deccan in that period of time. Don't go far. I'll be back in 30 seconds, right after this.
Maximum connectivity, maximum luxury, maximum lifestyle. Live your max at Prestige Raintree Park. Opulent residences nestled in 21 acres of breathtaking landscape with 1 lakh plus square feet of clubhouse, 3 swimming pools, and ample leisure and sports amenities. Experience exquisite living at Prestige Raintree Park in prime Whitefield with schools, offices, hospitals, and shopping malls just a hop away. Call 81399 or visit prestigeconstructions.com to know more. Radar approved.
Hi, I'm back, and let's move it ahead. Now, the Nolambas and the Gangas, in this point in history, were in a good place in their relationship. The Nolambas were vassals of the Pallavas, and after centuries-long enmity had started to get close to the Gangas. And this, of course, was because the Rashtrakutas were looming large, a threat to everyone. Back in 810 AD, the Nolamba king, probably Anniga or Veera Nolamba, stepped into battle to help Shivamara fend off his brother who had challenged the throne. And in the next few years, the Nolambas, who were still close to the Gangas, would have watched as the Ganga king Shivamara spent many years in a Rashtrakuta prison, enduring this blow-hot, blow-cold relationship he had with Govinda. Finally, when the Pallavas and the Rashtrakutas had jointly crowned Shivamara formally as king of the Gangas, the Nolambas would have been VIPs at the coronation. Now that must have been quite the party. The spectacle of so many kings arriving with large retinues of men and soldiers, and importantly, palace women adorned with jewels on display to assert the wealth and power of their king. Medieval literature speaks of these celebrations that included feasts and poetry readings and jousts such as wrestling matches, but also provides a rather graphic description of a game that is astonishingly like polo. An old inscription describes Rashtrakuta king Indra's incredible skill in this, and it reads, "Indra alone is capable on earth of making the various movements in the 4 directions. The beauty of making movements on a horse with great velocity, inside, outside, to the right and to the left, without missing the circuit, avoiding such defects as going in a circle, ascending, turning around and retreating, and hitting exactly the ball with the stick, neither going beyond nor coming short of it." This description of Indra's skill, directing the ball with such precision and speed, and the mention of horses, it's polo. And this must have come to India through the Persian and Arab traders. It's all fascinating. But once these parties were over and done, their world returned to the uneasy business of war and bloodshed. On the Ganga throne, following Shivamara, was Rachamalla, his nephew, because Shivamara's own son Prithvipati was too young to rule. And when Prithvipati did come of age and wanted the throne, Rachamalla didn't give it up, but instead created a parallel or a collateral branch of the Ganga Dynasty. But I'm going to skip past this because, barring a few flashes, this was neither noteworthy nor permanent, and in a few decades merged back with the main branch. So now, when Rachamalla ascended the throne, the Ganga dynasty had been at the lowest ebb of its pride. When Shivamara was in jail, the Rashtrakuta king Govinda had appointed a governor to look after the Ganga kingdom, and then after that famous coronation, the Rashtrakutas pretty much had Shivamara in their grip. He could not take a single political decision without Rashtrakuta permission, and all in all this did not sit well with Rachamalla, and there was little that he could or would do when the invincible Govinda was still in power. But when Amogavarsha was on the throne, and everyone, including Amogavarsha's own son, had turned against him and given him a lot of trouble, Rachamalla took advantage of this confusion. He got rid of all the annoyances of all the governors and people who were controlling parts of the kingdom that had come under Rashtrakuta control, and then he consolidated the Gangavadi. That was the need of the hour, and Rachamalla delivered the goods. When Rachamalla died in 853, the throne went to his son Nitimarga. Nitimarga's given name at birth was Ereya, and his name shows up as Ereyappa on inscriptions, and this brings us to our fair city, Bangalore. From inscriptions that speak of irrigation and other projects, it appeared that life in the Bangalore districts had started to grow with new settlements and a general increase in population. And all this was because of trade. This stands to reason. Following a slump in the 5th and 6th centuries in international trade, things had started to pick up again with the rise of the Cholas. By the end of the 9th century, the Cholas had begun to dominate South India import-export trade. Now, the previous dynasties, notably the Pallavas, did have something of a significant trade that was going on. But the Cholas were a thalassocratic people, which means that a good part of their existence depended on the sea. It also means that with their long-range seafaring capabilities in both military and trade, they became principals in international trade and not merely interport traders. And with the Cholas' forays into Southeast Asia, things started to look up in the Deccan. Maritime trade from the east and the west coast of India, which centuries ago was of great significance to the world, had again started to regain a certain momentum. And the goods that were carried to these ports between the east and the west coast, and also the ones that arrived to these ports from the north, all passed through the hubs in the middle of the Deccan. And the most important of those hubs included Hebbal and Begur, these being places that are today a part of Bangalore and therefore are a part of the history of Bangalore. And from several inscriptions in the Begur area, which is south of Bangalore, we start to get an idea, a window into what life was like in that time. And two inscriptions in particular were of significance in the story of the city, stories that spoke of the battles of Tumbepadi, which is near Tumkur, and fleetingly the battle for Bangalore that told us that our city's name was Bengaluru in 900 AD. And all that excitement is coming up on the next episode as we push forward with our series on the Gangas to its completion. I plan to bring up the next episode immediately following this one, so keep an eye on this, or even better, hit that button that gives you an alert. Till then, I am Ramjee Chandran, and this is the History of Bangalore.